What you know, Alibuyers. Hope you guys are doing well. It is Wednesday, February 18th. I did a smaller update yesterday because there just wasn't a lot out there that was verified. But today we have a little bit more. So we're going to dive into some of the interviews that Sheriff Nanos gave to several media outlets yesterday. I'm going to link those full interviews in the description so you can go watch them in their entirety. So we're on day 18. Yesterday, we found out that the DNA that was recovered from that glove on the side of the road around 2 miles from Nancy's home did not hit on anything in CODIS, which is the FBI's database of DNA profiles. We also learned the DNA recovered from that glove did not match DNA that was found in the house that did not belong to Nancy or anybody in her inner circle. We're going to get into the next steps with this DNA, but you guys may remember that there was a blue shirt that was in front of Nancy's house for several days. We were wondering why that was there and why it was staying there. Border Patrol said that they used that shirt with their canine in a search. We've also heard that they're going into gun stores in the area with photos and names and showing those to employees of the different stores, asking if any of these individuals look familiar and maybe came in and bought a firearm. It's a little confusing because Sheriff Nanos said in an interview yesterday it wasn't photos, but they would go in with a video to show these employees. However, an employee of a local gun store said the FBI came in and he was shown between 18 and 24 photos, as well as a list of names, asking if anyone looked familiar and also if he could pull up these names to see if any purchases had been named by these listed individuals. So it's a little conflicting story there where you have people that have actually been visited by the FBI say they gave me photos and names, and the sheriff is saying, no, we're taking in videos. I don't know about you guys, but for me, I feel like a press conference is way overdue. We have had 2 SWAT operations happen since the last press conference. They found the glove, and not everybody has the time to go sift through all of these different interviews to see what the sheriff is saying. You know, and you don't want somebody who may hold a key piece of information to not see these interviews, and that's a missed opportunity, but that's just me. Moving on to the glove, we know yesterday it was reported that the DNA recovered from that glove was put into CODIS, which is the FBI's DNA database. This is a one-on-one match if found, meaning it's all or none. We talked about how the DNA in the glove is different from the unknown DNA that was found inside Nancy's home. The sheriff said other DNA, he did not specify where it came from, was put into CODIS and found no match as well. But he did say they do have more DNA to put into CODIS and try and find a match. And since there has been no match in CODIS so far, the FBI has started the investigative genetic genealogy to try and find familial DNA to link the unknown samples to a relative if possible. And if you followed the Bryan Kohberger case, this is how they eventually found him. This can take some time to do. For example, in the Kohberger case in early December 2022, they started for familial connections. By December 19th, they had identified Bryan Kohberger as a suspect, and that connection was made through paternal lineage. It's not an identity. So how they do this is when they have an unknown sample and they're going this route, they'll put that into these heritage site databases and look for essentially what is called a DNA cousin. If there is a hit on that, it populates a list of people who share some of their DNA with the suspect. Of course, the closer you are related, the more DNA you share, and vice versa. If you're not closely related, it's going to be a smaller percentage. So for example, when I uploaded mine to do genealogy, my first cousin popped up, but then I had 2,000 other matches of people that I share a portion of my DNA with, and they were from all over the world. So hopefully they find somebody with a closer genetic match or a closer relative as opposed to a list of hundreds or potentially thousands of people. But once a list of relatives is compiled, you take the people who match and create the equivalent of a family tree. They do a lot of work from that. And in the end, you have one person who is not on that family tree, and that's your suspect. My understanding is these results are given to investigators only as a lead. Then investigators from the sheriff's office have to go from there. In Brian Kohberger's case, they were staking out his parents' house, and the confirmation of the match came from them pulling the trash at his parents' house. And in what was tested, the DNA found in the trash can came from a male who could be the biological father of the person whose DNA was found on that knife sheath. So they were able to narrow that down to Brian Kohberger very quickly. Once he was arrested, they took his DNA and found that there was an exact match from that touched DNA on the knife sheath to Brian Kohberger. Definitely has the potential to yield better results because, as we know, CODIS consists of people who have been arrested or convicted and had their DNA taken. Not everybody who's arrested has it taken, to where a lot of people have done the genetic genealogy. So for me, I think there's a better chance of getting a lead from that because you have a lot of potential connections there to work with. But let's go through the process from CODIS to genetic genealogy. When they are preparing to put a sample into CODIS, they use what is called a PCR test. It takes about a day to get the results. So what is a PCR test? Let's go to school for a minute. Scientists can take a tiny bit of DNA and they put it in a special machine that heats and cools that sample over and over. Each time it does that, the DNA in the sample doubles. In the end, one tiny piece of DNA could become millions of copies that can be tested. So that way, if it's a small sample where you got one shot to get the DNA, they can just make tons of copies of that DNA to be able to continue testing in the future to where it would not be consumptive of that DNA sample. Moving back to yesterday, investigators were seen at Nancy's neighbor's house. They were looking at a floodlight that has a camera, but from everything I've read, they did not remove it. They could have been getting the SD card out of there if it had one. We're not sure. Also, a lot of you have seen that business card that was on Nancy Guthrie's front door. It was from Adult Protective Services, and everybody was wondering, why did that show up after she went missing? A neighbor called Adult Protective Services after Nancy was reported missing, and an investigator was sent to the house, and that's why the card was left. So moving on to these interviews that Sheriff Nanos gave yesterday, he gave several, and Brian Enton was one of the journalists that interviewed him. He said that they are still trying to recover video from Nancy's cameras, and it is in Google's hands right now. He said when they released the footage of the suspect at the front door, that generated almost 5,000 tips alone. The sheriff also said they removed biological evidence, prints, DNA, and electronics from Nancy's house. The digital items were given to the FBI due to their capabilities with electronics. He addressed the DNA being sent to the lab in Florida that they have a contract with. He said they can prioritize the samples to where other labs may have cases in front of Nancy's, and it could have taken more time to get those results. He said when the glove was found, the FBI did ask to send it to Quantico, and the sheriff said, let's just keep all evidence together in one place. Sheriff Nanos said the FBI said that makes sense, and he denies blocking evidence from the FBI. The sheriff said they don't know if the suspect seen on camera was working alone or with others, but he said we will know when we find him. As far as the legitimacy of the ransom letters, the sheriff said the FBI is handling that and he would not want to give his opinion. He said there are 400 people from 10 agencies working this case, and a lot of them are just out in the field chasing down leads. In another interview, the sheriff said when you run out of leads, that's when your case goes cold. As for the critics, he said he doesn't need to hear from people who don't do his job. People have pointed out in the surveillance video from the front porch, it looks like the suspect is wearing a ring. Sheriff Nanos told Fox News Digital he has seen the photo and investigators will analyze that before they draw any conclusions. Also, Justin Lum from Fox 10 Phoenix interviewed Sheriff Nanos. He would not tell if there were signs of forced entry or not. When evidence is brought into the sheriff's office, some of it is turned over to the FBI because of the capabilities they have with certain items of evidence that the sheriff's office doesn't. He did say the FBI was brought on immediately, and again, in this second interview, denies keeping key evidence from the FBI. He tells Justin Lum that they do have other evidence from the scene that is being tested as well. He said they found a mixture of DNA at the scene, meaning a sample that has the DNA of more than one person. And when you have a mixture of DNA, hopefully you can separate the two and make individual profiles, but sometimes they can't establish profiles for each contributor. So let's go back to school for a moment. How does a mixture happen? There's a lot of ways, but let's look at the most common ways. Two people touch the same object. Also, a struggle could have happened, or a surface has old and new DNA on it. So how do they go about separating these two different DNA profiles? It uses the method we just talked about, copying that DNA over and over and over. So you have person A's DNA and you have person B's DNA. This produces a chart. So I'm going to put this on the screen, and it really probably isn't clear for us who have no idea how this testing works, but they look at the peak heights on a graph. They count how many contributors might be present, and they separate the major versus the minor contributors. And then they compare that mixture to the known DNA samples. So if I'm going to explain this like we're all 5 years old, if a DNA lab gets a mixture, thinking about getting paint that is made from different colors, they have to figure out which colors, and in this case, that would be the people, are mixed together instead of seeing just one solid color. They can get varying results, such as someone can't be excluded as a contributor, and then they go back to that graph. It shows peaks and lows. So the higher the peak, the more likely that individual is a major contributor. Smaller peaks could mean they're a minor contributor. Justin Lum also asked Sheriff Nanos about the Guthrie siblings and spouses being ruled out, and he said they were ruled out a while ago. The family has cooperated 100% from cars to phones to electronics to statements, and they have looked into who dropped Nancy off or saw her last, and that's where you start in an investigation. He said the family are victims in this as well. He goes on to say that the media, social media, has put a wedge between the FBI and the sheriff's office. He said both agencies need each other, but in an interview with Fort Hatchett from ABC 15 in Arizona, he says the media has also gotten them leads that are needed, and they need more. His belief is Nancy is still alive. He said there is no proof of life, but there's also no proof of death. And sometimes faith is all you have. He said his investigators and the family still have that hope. And he tells whoever has Nancy to just let her go, take her to a park, take her to a hospital. His investigators spent 20 hours at Nancy's home before the crime scene was released. And lastly, Carlos, the first person detained in this case last week, said strangers are showing up to his home and also following him around town. He said the guessing from investigators and online sleuths is taking a huge toll on his family, and I get that. So that's the latest today. I'll keep an eye out for anything new. This is one of those cases where it may seem quiet and all of a sudden we get a lot of action. So if anything breaks, I will do a YouTube short to update you. If anything major happens and it looks like there's activity, we will definitely go live. So make sure you're subscribed and you have notifications enabled. That is it for now. Hope you guys have a good afternoon, and we will see you soon.